back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
Once again, we appreciate all the love and support you guys show throughout all of our episodes. It does not go unnoticed. But for today's episode, this is kind of a part two of our last episode, as I'm going to the Bucks game on Sunday, so we can't necessarily record on Sunday. It's Bucks Wizards, by the way, if you couldn't tell. But yeah, this is a interesting episode because, like I said, it's divided into two. But before we really get started with things, don't forget to like, subscribe, and of course follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast to stay tuned for updates and things like that.
Yep.
But to kick this episode off, we got to talk about this, and we haven't talked about it, because it happened a little while ago, but we couldn't talk about it because had already recorded our episode. Well, we were recording it while it was happening. Sorry if I'm rambling, but Dame Lillard dropped 71. So that is the second 71-point game that we have had this season.
Just ridiculous.
Yeah, and we've talked about it on the podcast in our early episodes that scoring is insane at this level and in this era of the NBA. People are scoring at efficient rates and astronomical point totals. Like it's almost unreal. It feels like we're watching like some My Career Elseworld stories or something. But with Dame, we've covered him on the podcast a decent amount of times, but it's interesting because he really only gets talked about when he does something pretty powerful like this, or winning the 3-point contest, and that's because they're never in contention. Portland has been stuck in a rut for a while. They have not figured it out yet. They're trying to build through the draft. They can't attract free agents. They're just in a rough spot. It's unfortunate because they are quite literally wasting one of the top point guards golden years. Like, I mean, the man is dropping 71 and they're not necessarily in a contending spot.
Right.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, obviously, the game. I didn't necessarily recap the game. I kind of just gave my personal thoughts on Dame. But I'm curious to hear what you have to say about him.
Yeah, I mean, 71 points on only 38 shots. Again, like you talked about, it's the second time this season somebody scored 70 plus. Super efficient game. It was against Houston, which, we've talked about it multiple times this season. They are just an absolute, just atrocious mess of a basketball team. Almost can't even really call them a team half the time. I have no idea what's going on there, but still, but it was still at times somewhat of a competitive game, sort of, despite Houston's ineptitude. But which kind of, goes to show how much of a mess Portland's been this season. We kind of talked about it, they're kind of in that similar spot with the Lakers and the Pelicans, where I believe they are 12th in the Western Conference. They can still kind of win a few games, but they just haven't been able to make a run. They've lost, I believe, 2 in a row since that Houston game, and it's just been really unfortunate because, again, like you said, one of the top point guards, also just one of the great guys in the league.
Oh, yeah.
And again, the crazy part is, like you said, you mentioned we talked about Lillard previously. He had one of the other reasons why we talked about him previously was because he scored 60 points in a game earlier this season. So this is the second time he scored 60 or more points in a season. Also one of the oldest players to have a point total this high. I mean, he's had a great individual season. It's just a shame that Portland's just been, just in a really tough situation.
Right.
Billups has kind of been, I think personally, a relatively poor coach. I know that Portland doesn't have a great roster, but it just feels like they should be in theory a little bit better. I know they've also had some bad injury luck, but still. Also just a weird mix of players. They've been very small. Sometimes playing guys that are more like guards at the 3-4 spot. We talked about Lillard and Simons not being great defensively as a backcourt, but, still, I mean, it's great to see. You kind of wonder, actually, as we talk about it, today is the 61st anniversary of the Wilt Chamberlain 100-point game.
True.
So we've been talking about, offense, and you kind of wonder, is it possible that record might be broken at some point? I mean, with the way guys are scoring, I mean, I don't know. I think somebody could potentially maybe get 80 if they're really hot.
Yeah.
But then you also have to factor in the defense, I think, is still better, and more sophisticated than it's been in previous eras, even
Yeah.
though the offense is also really good. But I don't know, with the way these guys shoot, I mean, he had 13 threes. I mean, that's second the second most threes in a game. I believe Klay Thompson has the record with 14, obviously
Yeah.
another great shooter.
Mm-hmm.
But I do kind of wonder, just will that record be broken? I mean, I don't know. I think that's a really uphill battle to climb just because, I mean, 100 points is a lot. And I mean, we've had guys score 70, but we haven't had somebody score 80 in a while. That was Kobe. But I mean, it could happen. I mean, but I would probably lean more towards no. But I think you could still, I think 80 is definitely reachable, especially like if they left somebody in a game and just let them just kind of go for it.
Right.
Because they pulled him out and he was kind of jacking towards the end, but still, I mean, it's an incredible performance, and we just had to talk about it. It's kind of a shame that it happened after we recorded one of our last
Yeah.
podcasts, but I'm glad we can at least talk about it now.
Yeah. And with Dame, like, the problem is you can't be bad with Dame. There's no excuse. Portland can give me however many excuses they want, but I'm not gonna validate those because you have Damian freaking Lillard, bro. Like, you should be in playoffs. I'm not saying you got to be the number one seed, but you got to at least be eighth almost every year. There's no way unless Lillard's out because that's how good he
Right.
is, and
Yeah.
that just goes to show you how poorly run and managed that team really is because they've been like this for years, and it's sad.
Yeah. And last year, obviously they missed the playoffs and tanked, but again, that was a season where he was hurt.
Right.
And it was kind of interesting because there were many people who thought that he might kind of be leaning more towards being done.
Yeah.
I feel like like there's a lot of times where people will kind of see a guy's performance and kind of feel like, is he just not what he used to be?
Right.
Is he washed? I think saying washed is always kind of going too far.
Right.
Maybe you could factor in, he's older, so he's probably more likely to miss time. But I mean, this is one of his best seasons. This may be the best he's ever played because I mean, like, you have to factor in all of these incredible offensive outputs.
Right.
But again, it just sucks that the team isn't very good. And you kind of wonder where Portland is going to go. He doesn't seem like he wants to ever leave Portland, but you almost kind of wonder if it might just be better for Portland to just move him just because, again, he's good enough that you're not going to be one of the worst teams in the league with him out there. But, at the same time, you're probably not going to be one of the best teams with him on there without some legitimate help. And that's just going to be really hard to do, like you said, with him being in Portland, not being able to attract free agents. So it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
If I was Portland, we've talked about it before. Personally, I would trade him just to kind of move on and move him to a situation where he's got a better chance to win. But as long as he doesn't want to move, it doesn't seem like he's going anywhere.
Yeah. So moving on, we've got one of the
Oh boy.
more interesting NBA stories, I guess you could call it. I mean, it really isn't even an NBA story, it's more of a personal story of a player in the NBA.
Yeah.
The self-proclaimed bad boy of Memphis, Ja Morant. So,
Ja Wick.
Ja Wick. I mean, this guy is something else. That's all I can say. Just to give you some background on him, he's obviously the point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies. Um,
Yep.
but he has some big character flaws that are kind of showing and have been showing this season, too frequently in my opinion. He at first he there was a report that his posse had got into it with Pacers players, something like that, and they were flashing guns, all kinds of craziness that
Laser
doesn't
pointer.
that doesn't need to be, put out there. You shouldn't be hanging with those people if you're in the NBA. Simple as that. You've reached that status and you don't need to throw it away for something as stupid as that. But, what we want to talk about right now is the police reports of a altercation that happened during the summer. So he's been accused in the reports of punching a teen and making threats. The incident occurred at his house, which is crazy. It was like an open court run or something that he was doing at his house. And, you know, his agent came out and refuted the whole thing and was like, oh, yeah, this is just gossip and all this stuff. Well, the police reports came out and he claimed that he swung first, but it was self-defense. And, these are all this is all alleged. Nothing's been confirmed. There's been no charges because he claims it was self-defense, and they don't want to pursue it, I don't think. But you know, from going to saying that it's gossip to this happened and there were police reports, this doesn't look good for him character-wise. I don't think it's gonna impact him long term. But right now, he's just the laughing stock of social media. People are saying he's gonna be the first player to make it out the league and go back to the hood, which he's not even from. He's from the suburbs. Nothing wrong with that. From the suburbs too, but like, don't act like that. There's no reason to act hood when you're not from there. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to impress? Um, and with Morant, it's like he apparently flashed a gun. That's all alleged too. That wasn't reported. But they said that he repeatedly punched a teenage boy in the head during a pickup basketball game. There's no reason for that. I get hormones, whatever. Basketball brings out some emotions in us. We can all attest and agree to that. But there's no
Right.
reason that you need to fight somebody. And he's a boy. He's 17. Yeah, he was in the wrong, but you as an adult, a grown man, should not be putting your hands on a boy like that. Like, I don't know. It's not funny, but at the same time, all I can do is laugh because what is he doing? I mean, you're in the NBA.
Yeah.
What are you trying to throw it away for?
Yeah. It's just kind of unfortunate because, it's another situation where we've talked about Memphis, different times in this podcast. It's kind of a weird roller coaster ride they've been on where they were, kind of one of the NBA darlings, I suppose.
Right.
Just a couple seasons ago, they have that season where they're in the play-in against Golden State. A lot of people didn't expect them to win, especially after they lost the last regular season matchup between them. And then they get in there, they make the playoffs. They don't beat Utah, but it's a 5-game series, so they did get a win. And a lot of people were like, "Wow, this team is kind of on the up and up." But since then, they've kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Obviously they are a very confident team, but I feel like sometimes a lot of people feel like it leans more into arrogance, right? Where, they're talking about, you guys are the old guard, but now we're the next dynasty coming up. Obviously they've gotten into it with Golden State, a lot of physical altercations between their players, right? With Dylan Brooks, Draymond Green. But I don't know. It's just a very just unfortunate situation to be in because obviously he's one of the top players in the league, but
Right.
it's just not a good look. When you're a superstar, one of the best bright young players in the league, you're kind of at a point where you have a huge following, so there's a lot of people, that look up to you,
Right.
um, and respect you, and it's just kind of rough because this is just something you don't want to necessarily see. And again, obviously, I don't know him personally, but
Right.
it's just when I read that, I was just really disappointed because it just felt like another reason for people who already may not necessarily like him to obviously dislike him even more. So
Right.
I guess for me, personally, the word I just feel is kind of just disappointment,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I get that. And I don't want to dwell on this too long because this doesn't even deserve that much attention. But he had another incident pretty recently, where his mother was being not being, but she got into a dispute with a store employee in Memphis, and the police report said that she called Ja, and he pulled up with 9 guys and pressed the guy out who was working at the finish line. In my opinion, that's unacceptable behavior for an NBA player. That's a bad role model. You have kids that look up to you. Now they're gonna act out and act as entitled as you because this is ridiculous. It's getting to a point where the off the court stuff is overshadowing his on court greatness. We can't dispute that. He's great on the court, but off the court, it's getting to a point where you got to cut it. You just got to stay out the headlines. And I think his dad is probably going to rein him in because, his dad is a very public person, clearly, as you can see, him on the court side, celebrating him, all that stuff. But he's got to, put the reins on him and tell him this isn't acceptable. I didn't raise you that way. Something. Talk to him. Get him to stop the antics. Because Ja Wick, Za Morant, whatever you want to call him, is not it. But I'm done
Yeah.
talking about that. I don't even think we need to say anything more about him.
Right. Yeah. So let's move on. Oh, notification from Chris Haynes and yeah, from Chris Haynes that Steph Curry is gonna return Sunday
Perfect.
against the Lakers. All right.
Perfect. That's
Yeah. So
great.
there we go. Yeah. We talked about that in our previous podcast, but obviously, that's huge for Golden State, and that's a little bit earlier than you would have expected. So that's basically the start of the road trip, I think.
Yeah.
So, moving on, we got kind of sort of a funnish topic, I guess, to kind of get into. So on Reddit, there's somebody with a username Remy P Lambert. So he basically polled a lot of the NBA subreddits. So if you've ever been on Reddit, it's a community where there's lots of little pages for tons of different things, right? So
Yeah.
obviously there's an NBA Reddit subreddit where you can go on, and there's different subreddits for the individual teams. So basically, he polled each NBA team subreddit and asked them various questions, right? Like, who's your favorite player on your team? Who's the best player on your team? What the most frustrating aspect is, and we just kind of wanted to get into a few of the teams. So we're gonna start with Boston, just because again, they're one of the teams that was in the finals last year. They're one of the best teams in the league. Obviously, they have one of the biggest fan bases in the league, so we kind of wanted to start with them. So who's the best player on your team? Almost universally, everybody said Tatum. So
Yeah.
that's kind of to be expected. Obviously, I think everybody would agree.
Right.
He's their best player for sure.
He is.
Who's your favorite player on the team is kind of interesting. It was almost a complete split between Marcus Smart and Jason Tatum. Jaylen Brown was third, but Marcus Smart got three more votes than Jason Tatum. So Marcus Smart is a little more of Reddit's or the Celtic subreddit's best or favorite player on the NBA Celtic team.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Um, there was a lot of Marcus Smart hate a few years
Yeah.
ago and last
Right.
year. Um,
hmm
so that's surprising to me. I would have thought it would have been Tatum or Jaylen Brown, somebody of that
Yeah.
on that level. But
hmm
I've never thought of Marcus Smart as a fan favorite. That's a surprise to me. But I don't really know any Celtics fans personally. But that could have just been people on Instagram just trolling.
Right.
So
Yeah. And yeah.
that's just a
And in
surprise.
fairness, we do have to point out that because this is Reddit, obviously the demographics may be a little bit different.
Right.
So versus like if they asked, Twitter or
Oh yeah.
Instagram, or if they actually went and asked people in person, right? Obviously the results are going to be different, but
Right.
still, who's the best defender on your team? They said Marcus Smart. Um, and then Robert Williams was kind of close. So pretty much Smart and Robert Williams, those are their according to them, their two best defenders.
Okay.
Um, Most frustrating player on the team, Grant Williams, pretty overwhelmingly.
Okay.
The next closest was Sam Hauser, but again, for him, he's a guy where he probably won't play as much
Right.
as they get to the playoffs. So it's kind of interesting, but that makes sense. I think Grant Williams, when he's playing really well, if you're a Celtics fan, you probably enjoy his contributions, but when he's not playing great, it can probably be really frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, what are your season expectations? Championship, pretty much overwhelmingly. That makes sense. Again, they
It's
went to the
Boston
finals
for you.
last year. Exactly. Yeah, and it makes sense. They went to the finals last year. They're still one of the best teams this year, so I think that makes a lot of sense.
Boston
Um,
fans, regardless of the sport, they expect a championship every year, no matter what your
exactly.
roster is.
Exactly. Yeah. What has been the biggest surprise this season? So there's kind of a three-way split, sort of.
Okay.
Um, Ime Udoka scandal
Okay.
got the most votes,
Fair.
then followed by Malcolm Brogdon, relatively
Okay.
close, and then followed by Luke Cornett.
Okay.
Kind of interesting. Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. That's kind of an interesting trio. The Udoka one definitely makes sense. I think
Yeah,
that caught everybody off guard.
for sure.
Um, yeah, Brogdon. Yeah, I guess again it was another situation where nobody expected Boston to trade for Malcolm Brogdon. The Luke
True.
Cornett one is kind of interesting. I know there's also another factor where I think this was done before the trade deadline, so some of
Yeah.
the responses that you're going to see are going to be a little bit different as we get into a couple of the other teams, but
Right.
still it's always fun to talk about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Who's your favorite non-Celtics player? So this is kind of, in my opinion, one of the more interesting topics, just because it's like you can kind of see like like who is the favorite player for different fan bases
Right.
for other teams. So they chose fairly overwhelmingly Nikola Jokic.
Okay.
Then after that, Luka, then Steph, which is kind of interesting just
Hmm.
considering they played against Boston, but I guess,
Yeah.
that's kind of a pretty high level of respect there.
Right.
And then Ja Morant, as we mentioned,
Oh,
who
great.
at 4. Yeah,
That
kind of
guy.
interesting. Yeah, then Lillard, then Durant. Then this one's kind of funny. Who is your least favorite non-Celtics player? So
Oh,
we
that's
pretty
got to be
much,
Kyrie.
yeah, it's very overwhelmingly Kyrie. It's over 70% Kyrie. Then after that, it's LeBron. Makes sense considering they've had a lot of battles over the years. Then it's Embiid, similar situation. Dylan Brooks, you're gonna see his name a lot.
Oh yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Y-
Draymond Green makes sense, obviously, because they got into it last year. So, and then who's your biggest rival in the NBA?
Okay.
I think this one is very obvious. I'm surprised the percentage isn't higher, but it's the Lakers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the greatest sports rivalries of all time, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, I'm assuming maybe it's not quite as high just because like the Lakers and the Celtics haven't really necessarily been great at the same time. Obviously,
Right.
the Lakers won the title in 2020 and Boston was a pretty good team because they went to the conference finals, but since then obviously since the Lakers haven't been as good, right? They've kind of been out of the picture as the Celtics have kind of risen. And then obviously the Bucks, they've played the Celtics in the playoffs a lot. So that kind of makes sense. Then
Yeah.
Golden State, ton of sense, right? They just played each other in the finals. Philly, they've had some historic battles,
Hmm.
especially in previous eras, like in the 80s with Dr. J and Bird.
Yeah. It's
Um,
probably their
yeah,
biggest Eastern Conference rival.
yeah. And then this part, what is your favorite part of being a Celtics fan?
Hmm.
So they basically just had like a few one word or, one sentence response. History, tradition, Celtic pride, talent, banners, the fans, culture, winning, a lot of those.
Must be
We
nice.
be bussin'. Yeah, we be bussin'. Um, Jason Tatum,
Okay.
championships. Brad Stevens, kind of interesting.
I
He
guess that's
runs the team, so
management. Yeah. Because I was gonna say I
yeah,
thought they hated him as a coach, but could be
yeah,
wrong.
but yeah, so kind of fun, just to look at.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts, kind of, on this one? I mean, I think this kind of makes sense. There's a few surprises in there, but overall, I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. There are a couple surprises, like you said, scattered. I think that's what's gonna happen when you do a survey or whatever. With
Yeah,
any statistic, there's always gonna be a surprise, but uh,
right.
a lot of it I expected. Nothing really too crazy. I would definitely expected the Kyrie thing, Grant Williams, all that. It just runs, fits the script.
Yeah. Um, so going to the Warriors, again, another team that went to the finals last year.
Right,
Best player, Steph, makes a ton of sense.
for sure.
Favorite player, Steph, makes a ton of sense. Best defender, Draymond, makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Most frustrating player, pretty overwhelmingly Jordan Poole, like
Okay.
insanely overwhelming. It's
Growing
over
pains.
80%. Yeah, yeah, and again, he's been up and down, so
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Season expectations kind of surprises me.
Okay.
Um, th- it's kind of split between championship contender, playoffs, and deep playoff run. I
Okay.
would have thought that championship contender would have had a higher percentage just
Yeah.
because they won the title last year. I know from the jump it's been kind of an up and down season, but I would have thought that there would have been a little more like just, we kind of started off slow, but we're gonna
Right.
probably get it together. But obviously, the longer you go into a season, and the more that you kind of just stay where you are, the less belief you're gonna have. But
Yeah.
still, they've been better, so that one kind of surprises me.
Yeah. That's interesting. I
Yeah,
would have thought championship all the way. I thought that's the culture they had built, but clearly they probably didn't like what they were seeing at the beginning of the season. They were like, "Yeah, we'll get into the playoffs. That's all that matters."
all right, so what has been the biggest surprise this season? Not being very good, over
Fair.
50%. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense because
Yeah.
I don't think anybody saw that coming. I remember there was one ESPN survey, I believe, where a guy had them, I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but I remember he had them ranked as the 8th seed. But again, this was like, before the season began. So I
Oh
don't know
wow.
if he was like doing that based off of them just taking a step back. And I guess they have taken a step back, but still, that was kind of surprising. But
Right.
I don't know. That one was kind of interesting to me. Who's your favorite non-Warrior player?
Oh.
It's kind of relatively split a little bit. Jokic is the favorite. You're gonna see that a
Okay.
lot. Seems
Yeah.
like a lot of fans like Jokic a lot. on here. And again, this is Reddit, so it's going to be a little bit different fan base wise, but still. Then Giannis, then Luca, Lillard, then Durant. I think the Durant one makes sense. I think a
Yeah,
lot of Warriors still appreciate what Durant did, even though
for
he left
sure.
them. But yeah, so I think that one makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Um, who's your least favorite non-Warriors player? Pretty obvious, Dylan Brooks. Very overwhelming. Not even close. Kyrie
Yeah.
is second,
Okay.
which
I
makes
could see that.
sense. Yeah, Ja Morant third makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And then Chris Paul makes a ton of sense. So I think all four of these picks, it doesn't shock me at all, considering the history that those different players have with those teams,
No
especially Dylan.
surprises.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with Dylan Brooks and the Gary Payton thing last year.
Yeah.
Obviously Kyrie seems like is kind of a polarizing guy anyways. Ja Morant, obviously same with Dylan Brooks.
Right.
Chris Paul, same thing. And then who's your biggest rival in the NBA? They pretty overwhelmingly Memphis Grizzlies. I think that
Okay.
makes a ton of sense. Boston was second, but I think it makes sense that Boston isn't number one because I don't, outside of last season, I don't feel like Boston and Golden State really have a lot
Yeah,
of
they don't have
history.
no. No.
Whereas with Memphis, it's kind of been brewing for a few years.
Right.
Again, since they played in the play-in. Lakers, that one kind of surprised me because they haven't really had any
Hmm.
battles at all. Neither team has really been good at the same time, right? The year the Lakers won the title, the Warriors weren't very good.
Right.
And then obviously, when the Warriors won the title last year, the Lakers weren't very good. I guess it's just kind of the fan bases, in terms of the clashing of their superstars, I suppose. I
Yeah, I
guess
was
that
gonna
makes
say
you know,
it's probably LeBron and
considering
Steph more so.
yeah.
Yeah.
But still, Suns fourth. I
Okay.
mean, they haven't really played each other at all in the playoffs, but I
No.
guess they've had some regular season battles.
Right. That might be another thing with Chris Paul and Curry. I don't know. That's a weird one.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on into the Wizards.
Oh, joy. I can't wait for this
Yeah,
one.
yeah, your team is kind of interesting. So, I was really shocked by this one. So
All
they
right.
asked who's the best player on your team,
Should I
and
answer before? Do you want me to answer? Do you want
yeah,
me to
just answer.
answer?
Yeah, well,
So,
yeah. What do you think? I mean, I guess I
who's
kind of spoiled it.
this season?
Yeah, so they asked who's the best player on your team.
This season, I would
What
say
do you
it's
think?
between Kuzma or Porzingis.
Yeah, so they overwhelmingly said Porzingis. It's
Right.
like 75%.
Yeah.
Then Kuzma at 15, then Beal at like under 5%. Just kind of interesting.
I think
Um
that's about right, though.
mhm.
I mean,
Yeah, I
you said it was interesting, but I think that's pretty fair, especially coming from Wizards, man. We gave him all this
mhm.
money, but right now we're seeing pretty diminishing returns. He hasn't looked as good as he has in the previous years. And I think that's because now we have a more spaced out roster in terms of people who can actually do something with the ball and scoring. I think that's what we're looking at, but yeah, he's got to work on figuring out that fit. I'm not sure what's going on, but this season he has not looked like the Beal that we all know and love. So yeah, very disappointing. So I could see that.
He's been efficient, but I guess I can understand, if you feel like the numbers are down, especially
Yeah,
given what he's getting paid, that feels kind of disappointing.
and the
Um
injuries.
yeah, that too obviously. Who's your favorite player on the team? So, I guess, I'll kind of toss that to you. Who's your favorite player on the team?
Beal, 100%.
Well,
Yeah,
it was
that's my
split.
favorite.
It was
Okay,
actually split. So the leader was Denny Avdia.
really?
Um, yeah, so he got 21 votes out of 82.
Okay,
And Bradley Beal got 18. So it was very close, but still, Denny Avdia got,
wow.
more votes than Beal. And then pretty close behind is Kuzma.
Okay, I can see that.
So, yeah, so Avdia first, Beal second, Kuz third.
Yeah, that's a surprise to me though. I would have thought Beal would have been number one because that's our franchise
Yeah,
guy. So why wouldn't that be your favorite player? But moving on.
yeah. Who's the best defender?
Either Avdia or Delon Wright.
Yeah, it was Avdia and so DeLon Wright got 33 votes. Avdia got 30. So pretty
Okay,
much split between those two.
that's fair.
Who's the most frustrating player on your team?
Most frustrating. For me, it's either
Hmm.
Corey Kispert or Kuzma sometimes. Kuzma likes to
Interesting. So
jack.
Yeah, so Bradley Beal got almost 50% of the votes.
Fair.
Kyle Kuzma was second at 23%, and then Will Barton, your guy,
What?
was
He barely
third at
played.
50. Yeah, well, again, I think this was done around or before the trade deadline, so this could have been done earlier in the season when he was playing more. But
Even
yeah,
then,
it
though.
didn't seem. Yeah, it didn't seem like there's not too many fans of him. And then
Wow.
Avdia, fairly low, but still. What are your season expectations? I guess going into the season, what did you think?
Going into this season, playing. I think I said it on the podcast. It looked like they were chasing the play-in, and that's what I went with. So
Yep.
yeah,
So
playing or below.
yep. So split between just outside play in at 34 votes and play in at 33 votes.
Okay,
So pretty much what you thought.
that's about
Biggest
right.
surprise this season.
Biggest surprise. Kuzma. I would probably go Kuzma or Porzingis.
Okay. So interestingly enough, what got the most at almost 40% is Jordan Goodwin. The
Oh my
guard.
god, I forgot about him. No, he's great.
Yeah.
He's definitely a big surprise. He's really
Yeah.
good.
And then second was no development.
Okay, so they
I
must
think
be
that
talking
makes
about
sense.
Johnny.
Yeah, because he hasn't
Corey
really played it.
Kispert hadn't really. I mean, he's okay, but
Yeah.
he hadn't played like a lottery. Uh,
Yeah.
and then who else? Avdia. He's been kind of underwhelming, but he has taken the right steps steps in the right direction, but still underwhelming for a lottery. But
And
that's
then,
interesting.
yeah, favorite non-Wizards player.
Can't be Braun.
Hmm.
Can't be KD. Um, well, for me it would be KD, but I know for the rest of the fans, it's definitely not KD.
Wall.
Okay. Well, yeah, that should
Yeah.
have gone without. See, that's how attached I am to my Wizards. I still feel like he's a part of the goddamn team, and he's not. But
Yeah. Who's your least favorite non-Wizards player?
hmm. mm, me personally, I would go with. Mm, Me personally, I'll go with LeBron, bro. And the only reason I say that is because of that stupid freaking fadeaway. Talked about it multiple times, unfortunately.
So number one was Kyrie, 35%.
Okay, I
Number
get
two,
that.
Spencer Dinwiddie.
Okay, I can see that. He didn't really do much here anyway. I can see
Yeah.
that.
Then Joel Embiid.
Oh
And
yeah.
apparently,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off or do anything like that. But when I was at the Wizards game, when Philly came to town, yeah,
Mhm.
I didn't know that there was that much animosity towards
Yeah.
Embiid. Like when
Yeah.
he was at the line, I heard boos, you stink, get out of
Mhm.
town, fatty, all kinds of crazy stuff. I was like, all right,
Yeah.
that's a little
Yeah.
excessive. Like I'm not an Embiid fan. I think he's a free throw merchant, overrated. But I could see that.
Yeah. Actually, I guess they must hate him so much he's on this graph twice. So,
Wow. All right then.
yeah. Who's your biggest rival?
Biggest rival. Hmm. Would it be? Can't be Boston. It can't be. Is it?
Yeah, it's Boston.
Okay. I could see that. But at the same time, I don't see it because we haven't won a championship since 1970 something.
Funeral game, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Don't remind me, bro. Now I'm getting sad.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they mentioned what is your favorite part of being a Wizards fan? Excessive drinking. I like pain. Hope beaten out. This sucks. Nothing. Suffering. Sadness. So, seems like a lot of Wizards fans are not super happy with their team right now.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm not happy with the team either. I'm in the same boat as them, except for the excessive drinking thing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Mhm.
that pretty much sums up the Wizards experience. I think that's a
Yeah.
perfect representation of what our team is about and what our fans are about because there's nothing to really cheer for if you're not winning.
Yeah. And then I guess for my team, the Lakers,
Oh
who's
boy,
the best player on your team?
Braun.
So, I mean, yeah, it was overwhelmingly LeBron, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite player on the team?
Okay. Am I supposed to guess or something?
Oh, I mean, I guess you don't have to. Overwhelmingly LeBron,
Okay,
about
yeah,
60%.
yeah,
Who's the best defender? Anthony Davis.
okay.
Who's the most frustrating player on your
Ooh,
team? A
I
guy
can't
that's
wait.
not even on the team anymore. So yeah, Russell Westbrook. Very
Okay,
overwhelmingly. In
yeah,
fact, so overwhelmingly, I'm surprised there's other names on here, but there are. AD and LeBron are the other two. But I think that's probably more so just because of the injuries.
right.
Um, what are your season expectations? Most people said play in or just outside play in. I think that makes sense. Which is just again kind of interesting because historically, usually the thought process is championship or bust. But obviously, it's been a tough last few seasons.
Right.
Biggest surprise: Thomas Bryant at
Okay.
31%. Darvin Ham sucks at 21%.
Okay.
Um, I think he started the season off okay. Got better, then had a stretch where he was really bad. I think he's been much better as of late. Again, not perfect, but I don't know. I don't think he's quite as bad
Right.
as other Laker fans would say, but I still would say he's probably in the lower, probably like in that third tier.
Yeah.
But again, he has room to grow. We'll see where this goes. Favorite non-Lakers player, Luca.
Okay.
I mean, mine personally would be Giannis. But I could definitely see a lot of people picking Luca.
Right.
Least favorite non-Lakers player,
Oh boy.
Dylan Brooks.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I guess because again, it's another scenario with Memphis. Has also kind of talked smack to LA, so I think
Oh
that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Biggest rival, Boston, very overwhelmingly, even
Yeah.
more so than what Boston said about the Lakers. Like, and then after that, it's the Clippers at like 9%, and then nobody else.
Okay.
Um, what is your favorite part of being a Lakers fan? The trade rumors. I think that's always kind of fun.
Yeah, you
But it
guys
can
have a
get kind
lot.
of tiring. Yeah, it can get kind of tiring at times, but I think it's fun. Fan base, nothing. Okay. History, 17 championships. AD, LeBron, Westbrook, interesting.
Okay.
Kobe,
Okay, I was waiting for
depression,
that. Depression?
depression. Yeah.
Okay. I
Well, I
guess.
mean, that's kind of a stretch to say, but it definitely hasn't been a fun last
Listen.
few seasons.
Listen. You guys need to be grateful. Lakers
I
fans,
am.
Lakers fan, I'm not even talking to you. You're an outlier. But Lakers fans in general, they need to figure it out because you can't complain and say depression, but you have a title in the modern era. You know what I mean? Take
Yeah.
it from a
No,
Wizards fan. We haven't won since the 70s. So that's depression. If you want to talk
avoiding
about
my
that.
wife.
Avoiding my
That's kind
wife?
that's kind of an interesting one.
Okay.
Yeah. So fan base approval pretty low for that one, which again I think makes sense. I think a lot of people were really frustrated during the earlier part of the season just
Yeah.
because it just felt like the team wasn't going anywhere. There was a lot of pessimism about whether or not they'd make a trade. I
Right.
think it's gone up since then, so I'd be curious to kind of see. I don't think they're going to do it obviously because that'd be a lot of work. I'd be curious to see how this had changed since they put it together.
Yeah.
But I think these are kind of some interesting topics to discuss.
Pretty accurate outside of the
Yeah.
depression thing.
Yeah. So moving on, I guess from that, James Harden, rumor reportedly that he might potentially return to Houston. We kind of talked about this a little earlier, I want to say in the season. I
Yeah.
can't remember which podcast, but it was definitely an earlier one.
Yeah.
We said it didn't make sense at the time. But again, we've heard this rumor again. Sam Amick and Kelly Iko of the or Eco of the Athletic. They have put this out again, so it maybe there's smoke to it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't know. I think it kind of depends on what Philly does. Personally, I don't think they're going to go super far. I
No.
think that they should win. They should get out of the first round. Obviously, like we haven't really talked about it, but with the way that some of these teams, like the Knicks and Cleveland, have been playing, I think they could make some of these first round matchups interesting. But I would still hope that Philly would get out of the first round
Right.
just because I think that would be a huge disappointment, especially as the third seed. I don't think they're going to get past Boston or Milwaukee. I suppose if Philly just kind of falls apart and flames out, maybe he leaves. Especially if Houston is more willing to pay him a ton of money, whereas maybe Philly doesn't want to. But I don't know. It just feels like he's kind of set up a partnership here with Daryl Morey and the previous one of the previous owners of the Sixers. It just feels like it wouldn't make a lot of sense at this point. And if that's the case, it would kind of just feel like he's kind of just given up in terms of winning a title.
Yeah.
So I would think he would stay in Philly. But again, I guess it just kind of depends on where this goes.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat as you. The only thing I have to add is what incentive would he have to go to Houston? The only thing I can think of is a max contract, like a super max one. But I mean, all he would gain from that is monetary stuff. Like, he definitely wouldn't win a championship. That team is trash. Um, I hate to say that because normally we don't trash people on the podcast, but Houston deserves it because that is the
Oh,
AAU.
yeah. Well,
Um,
Houston's not a person, thank goodness. So
yeah, but still, we don't normally like to trash
right.
anything. But
Mm,
yeah, with Houston, I still don't understand this rumor,
mm.
and if he does move, I will forever question it.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of wrap up, over last weekend, the CBA, or I guess 2 weeks ago or so, there was a report from Shams Charania about the CBA.
Right,
The Players Association and the NBA have kind of tried to hammer out some new details for a CBA. We're not going to cover all of them, just because there's a couple of things in there that I think, personally, like, like some of the stuff like the luxury tax and things like that
right,
are, not stuff we would typically discuss on this type of podcast. But we kind of want to get into, I think, some of the more interesting stuff. So one of the changes potentially is to lower the draft age to 18. So that would effectively end the one and done rule that's kind of been the deciding factor for a lot of these players where they go to college for a year, or maybe, as of recently go to the G League, but now they can potentially come out of high school whenever the CBA gets hammered down. I think this is a really um, big game changer just because, again, we had seen in the past guys come out of high school, LeBron, Kobe,
right,
Garnett, Dwight Howard. And obviously for every one of those guys, there's, a number of other guys that didn't necessarily pan out. Like say a Kwame Brown, or
right,
somebody like that. But either way, I think it is a game changer. The Players Association does seem like they are hoping for some type of correction to help out some of these veteran guys, maybe
right.
allowing them to kind of stick around, maybe in some mentorship roles, and things like that. Because they don't want to necessarily push a lot of the older guys out of the league, which I understand. Um, but at the same time, pretty huge news. I wonder if this does kind of potentially set up maybe some expansion teams down the road.
Yeah.
But let's talk about it. So, what do you think?
Um, for me, I think this is a great move. It'll bring in a lot of young talent, young guys. We're gonna see longer careers. I think that's something that needs to be pointed out too, because if you're coming into the league younger, um, then yeah, you're gonna probably last longer in the league too. So I have no issue with that. I do have a concern though, but it's not glaring. I think it's gonna be a small thing that probably will never happen. But you got to take into consideration if these guys are coming out of high school, they're not going to be as mature as some of the college guys coming out of college. And kind of tying back to the whole John Morant situation, unfortunately, uh, not everybody's grown. Everybody grows at a different pace, but we could be seeing some immaturity things start to come to fruition with some of these young guys. So I could understand if that's the reason they're hesitant. But, this opens up a lot of room to make some money for a lot of these young guys. But it's also going to take away from colleges too. They're going to start losing revenue on, whatever it may be, NCAA, March Madness, whatever. It could be dying, but um, I'm it also makes the competition stiffer though too because it's not like they're just going to let anybody out of high school into the NBA. And you know teams have been kind of conditioned where they might not want to even take that risk, so it could be a small percentage of guys because there's tons of guys who get compared to KD, LeBron, in their ninth grade year, but they
Right.
make it to college, then to the NBA, they're a role player. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's going to be a big gamble. I wouldn't expect it to be something where we're going to see an influx like a whole draft class out of high school. It'll probably
Right.
be one or two guys, if even that.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
we could be seeing a lot more high schoolers come into the league undrafted than go to the G League or something like that. I think that's a
Right.
more realistic route. I don't foresee any high schoolers going super high in the draft unless they're, somebody of Zion's caliber, maybe LeBron, something like that. Um, because I think Kobe was drafted pretty late. Not late, but late for a
Mid
guy.
middle.
Yeah, later for a guy of his career status, what he came to be. But I'm not sure where Garnett was drafted. LeBron obviously went number one, but a lot of these high school guys, they didn't go super super high up like number one. But I think it's a great move. Like I said, I love innovation. If they're changing the league up, it'll bring in more opportunities for people to make it out of bad situations, whatever the case may be. It's just another way for kids to potentially live out their dreams. I'm not opposed to it at all.
Yeah, I think just for reference, I believe Kobe was drafted 13th, and I think
Okay.
Garnett was drafted 5th.
Okay.
Um,
Never mind then.
in
I don't know what I'm
yeah,
talking
in
about
90,
then.
yeah, in 95 and
Gotcha.
96 respectively.
Okay.
Um, so I think I guess one positive I think that's definitely a good thing out of this is now there's definitely a ton of options. So
Yeah.
it's like you have the option if you're one of the top guys, you could come right out of high school into the NBA, right?
Right.
Um, if you're coming out of high school and you're really good, but maybe you're not necessarily feeling like you're ready, maybe you go into the G League, right? Um, or maybe you go into college, right? And then
Right.
obviously, for college players, right, you have the name, image, likeness thing, right? So, if you're not ready after a year, you can still make money
Right.
um, off your likeness and whatnot. So I think from what we've seen, either way, like regardless of what you do, you're gonna be in a good spot,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're super talented and you're ready to go, you'll be able to go once they hammer this thing out. And if you gotta wait a little bit, right, then you can wait it out and you'll still be in a good spot. You
Right.
know, especially because, like we said, with the name, image, likeness thing with the colleges, that puts you in a great spot as well. Because again, if you're not one of the top guys, you got to stick around, or maybe you even don't even make it into the NBA. Maybe you're great in high school, but maybe you go to college and you don't pan out as well, right? Then
Right.
you're still taken care of, which is good.
Yeah. I like it a lot.
Yeah. Another rule change, or I guess, one to kind of talk about to wrap it up. One that I do not like, or this one I like, right? So we'll
Okay.
start off with the one I like.
Okay. Cool.
Um, it's a rule change so we've talked about the coach challenges, right? It's been kind of frustrating where you can be in a position where you win the challenge, right?
Right.
But even if you win the challenge, you don't get anything out of it. I mean, other than obviously maybe you get that play,
Right.
but you don't get the challenge back. You get the challenge once regardless. But they're apparently considering a rule change where you win back your challenge if which I think is good because it's kind of, silly where you win a challenge and then you don't get anything out of it other than that one play. Let's say you
Yeah.
use it in the second quarter, right? Obviously it helps you in the second quarter, but maybe there's another late game situation where you need to use it and you can take advantage of the fact that you want it so you can kind of save yourself and that might potentially be a huge uh game saving play, right? If you call a timeout and challenge a call and completely flip around the call and then maybe you get the ball back and a chance to win the game. So I think this is good. I think this is a rule change that most people, including myself, would be happy for.
Yeah. Same boat as you. I'm all for it. Like I said it multiple times. Innovation is the greatest thing for the NBA. And with this rule, I think it'll add some stability to coaches, and I think they'll be probably more enticed to throw that thing, or not throw it. I'm thinking of football, sorry, but make sure that they get the challenge off because now
Right.
you'll probably be seeing more and more coaches saying, okay, well, if this is a definitive call, then we'll be able to challenge on the next one, because with
Right.
with the way the NBA is officiated now, there are some questionable calls. So I think this is a great way to counter that potentially, and
Yeah.
kind of put the refs back in check sometimes when they're a little bit too involved.
Now, this one I'm a little bit more concerned about.
All
So,
right.
reportedly, they're maybe thinking of the idea of changing potentially the fourth quarter and the overtime to target scores. Now, they said that most people didn't like the idea of the fourth quarter target scores,
Okay.
but they may actually like the target scores for overtime. I personally don't like it at all. I
No.
understand the idea of, well, we don't want to necessarily be in a situation where, like say a nationally televised game, right, is 2.5 hours normally, right, and maybe a little bit longer if stoppages in play happen a
Right.
ton. But then a game goes into like third overtime or fourth overtime or whatever. I think
Right.
I remember it's a playoff game. I want to say it was the Blazers and the Nuggets a few years back. And I think it went into triple
I
overtime.
remember that.
Yeah, and I think it didn't go off until like well after 2 a.m.
Yeah.
You know,
It was
on
rough.
and so and this is on the East Coast, right? So if you're on the East Coast, you're up until almost 3 a.m. watching a basketball
Right.
game on a weeknight, which is just, for the average person, not a great position to be in. So I can understand something like that. But at the same time, I just personally think like the way that it is fine. Like obviously, like you said, I love innovation, especially when it helps out. But I think there's other times where you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, and I think
Right.
this is one of them. I think the overtime is fine the way that it is. I mean, very rarely will you have a game go much past like 3 overtimes.
Yeah.
Obviously, the more overtimes there are, the longer it can go. And I understand, like I said, the scheduling issues, and the issues with delaying games and whatnot. But still, personally, I'm fine with the way that it is. I don't like the idea of a target score. I'm cool with it in an all-star game, but
Right.
not in a regular game where I think like it would just be kind of unfair. I mean, you could have a situation where, like let's say a team is, up by 3, right? And then you're going to hear somebody say, "For the win, it's good. They win by 6 points." Like that would just be kind of weird. I don't really like that.
Yeah.
But again, I understand if you want to shorten the length of a game, fine, but like I said, I hope they don't do this cuz I just think this would be a really bad idea.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. Like I said, I love innovation, but there's a difference between, don't what's the saying? Don't fix it, or don't, what is it?
If it ain't
God,
broke, don't fix it.
thank you. Holy, I'm tired. Sorry. But yeah, like overtime has worked for years. I don't think anybody's really had a problem with it. And it leads to some historic moments, as we saw a couple days ago, a few days ago. So, I mean, I have no problem with overtime, but a target score, it might be one of the dumbest ideas ever, because it eliminates the fun. And like you said, like a situation like that where you're up by 3 and then you hit a 3 to win the game, that just doesn't sound right, right? So,
Yeah.
like, I think they should keep it in the All-Star game. That's great. That gives you a cutoff point, and that those final moments heat up. But I don't think it would have the same impact in a regular season game or a playoff game. I just don't. I don't understand that one, because overtime is fine as is. And that's a different change than the challenge one. The challenge one is an improvement. This seems more like a weird gimmick. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm agreeing with you. I don't like this one at all.
Yeah. I don't know what they're doing with that one.
Yeah.
Um yeah. So, well, I guess this wraps up another episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, as we continue to say, we appreciate your support. Don't forget to follow us on our socials, Instagram, Twitter, and all that other good stuff at the OBT podcast. It's growing. We're going to start putting more content on there for you,
Yeah.
uh everybody involved. So just appreciate the support. Thanks a lot. uh Great for you guys listening to us, and we'll see you next week.